The moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. Obviously, comics have gone the way of movies, and movies are the more attention-getting vehicles of those comics. And I think one of the things that comics has struggled with a bit is how to properly harness that. So, it's funny because if you were in the 80s or the 90s, it was a very exciting idea that some of these, some of these heroes could be on the big screen. When Superman came out, that was a pretty big deal that this character from the comics was on the screen being treated seriously. And Batman with Keaton was an even bigger deal. It's like not only is it a big deal, it's making lots of money, it's you got toys everywhere and everything else. For people who have been reading comics, there was some, I don't know, weird kind of indication that their things that they loved were up on the big screen getting the attention they deserved. Now the side effect of that is 50 million Marvel Universe movies later, the movies are driving the universe in many respects. It's been interesting watching the movies introduce new characters and have those new characters then feed into the comics, and the comic writers like try and figure out how to make them relevant, but they don't really fit. I mean, I did the video a little while ago about the Samuel Jackson Nick Fury and the absolute backwards convoluted way they made that happen. In the main Marvel universe. In the Ultimate Universe, it was relatively fine. It was pretty simple. But in the Marvel universe, it's like he's got a son. The son happens to look exactly like the Ultimate guy. Oh, he lost an eye. I mean, just there's an aspect of kind of just silliness to that. And now you've got Darcy, and you've got the character from the Moon Knight series coming in. Anyway, regardless, you also have this factor of, okay, so if the movies are generating lots and lots of attention, and we've got millions of people seeing these comic characters that never saw them before, well, shouldn't that translate to bigger sales for the comic? Like, do you not want to have some of those movie actors doing more to promote the comics, or even not that, just anything to connect you back to the store? It seems like it would make sense, but that part of the mechanism really hasn't worked. It's been a one-way trip. But anyway, this viewer mail is kind of hitting on the same topic. It says, I wanted to ask, what is it? Sorry, let me start again. Hello, Perchington. We have to do the niceties. I wanted to ask what you believe is the best way to synergize between comics and live media. Personally, I don't think the comics should be affected by what happens in live action because they cater to two completely different audiences. I don't even think it's wrong to kill off a character when they have a movie coming out, although I do think it's weird how often this happens. I really like DC's approach to synergy. DC usually creates comics set in continuity with the live action, or the comics are set out of continuity from the main comic universe. Also, I like how DC gets people who are involved with the live action, like Paul Dano, writing the Riddler comic. I think the biggest issue DC faces is that it's marketing of these comics to comic readers rather than fans of the live action. The comic should be included in the marketing of the TV show or the film. I don't believe most fans of the DCEU or MCU are even aware that these tie-ins exist. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Have a good day. Thank you. You have a good day too. First off, I agree. I don't think that the comics and the movie should kind of eye each other as we've got to copy what the other is doing, or we've got to make these things sync up. But put it this, the movies aren't worrying about this at all. The movies are looking at the comics like they're books. And, they're like, I'm going to do an adaptation of this book and try and do it as, best as I can. And they're just going to kind of, whatever fits, and what doesn't, and fine. That's kind of just how they're acting. The comics, on the other hand, seem to be the ones that are more concerned with, keeping that synergy alive. And there's a reason for that. The basics are, you say they don't cater to the same audiences. That's true, although they would desperately like it not to be. And when I say they, I really mean the people doing the comics. So movies aren't really concerned like, oh man, we really need to get that comic audience, because it's a much smaller audience. They're not really concerned about that. The idea of based on a comic book, or it's coming from the Marvel Universe, was really just a way of saying, hey, we didn't invent this movie out of thin air. There's a whole backstory to it. There's some credibility here with this movie. They're using it as a way to kind of provide a sense of there's something, this isn't just your normal movie. This is a comic book at one time. And believe it or not, that does work. It gives moviegoers kind of like, oh, okay, so this thing is there's actually a story behind all this. All right, okay, I'll check it out. They do think moviegoers think that way, whether it's whether they think the comic books are important or not. It really doesn't matter. They could say, based on a video game. Actually, comics have more credibility for movie tie-ins and video games in the eyes of just kind of normies. And the reason being, the video game is something you play. The comic is considered, literature to some extent, and so that's how it's being perceived. It's being perceived as a tie-in that enables that. And so that's the movies use the comic books for that purpose, but that's it, and that's really as far as it goes, and there's not really any desire to go further than that. But there's again, there's nothing the other way. There's no need for it to happen in a different direction, and that becomes a problem. So the comic books are trying desperately to connect to the movies to say, hey, we've got those people. They're trying to kind of do the same trick in reverse, but the comic audience that they normally cater to doesn't particularly care. In fact, they've been wired in some ways to say, well, that movie version isn't the true version of the comic. The comic is true version. So the comic fans largely reject those attempts or view them as kind of phony. And the movie audiences couldn't care less. They don't know that, Darcy is showing up in Scarlet Witch and at all. And nor would it be a draw if they did. So the entire attempt to kind of tie one into the other is a losing game. In terms of how they're handling it, I do agree. I think it's probably better to carve out kind of your own little corner, like, oh, the cinematic, the MCU. If we want to do a comic or an adaptation or something based on that, it's Earth 427 or something. It's some other Earth in the multiverse. You just do it all over there and you just worry about it there. The thing is, though, those comic books probably wouldn't sell unless those comic books were particularly made to market and merchandise with the movie. I mean, you sell them in theaters or you give them out there and you try and do some cross promotion into your main line, or who knows, you could do something like that. But people aren't going to go into the comic shop and go, wow, I'd really like to follow the Marvel universe. Now, they may get that in Scholastic at book fairs, and they may get that at Walmart's, in a tie-in there. But that gets back to the kind of the old topic I've talked about before. You've got to pop open, distribution into other sources to make products like this work. If you're just doing it kind of the way you are, it's not really going to take. And so I think that the entire idea of having the comic books connect to the movies in terms of story and everything else. And by the way, I'm talking about Marvel and DC. I'm not talking about things like The Walking Dead, which had a really tight synergy from the beginning, or Invincible, where there's more creative control from Image, or it's a single universe. It's a whole different thing. It's an entirely different ballgame when you're talking about that. But in terms of just the comic books themselves, I don't think it's worth it. To use kind of the old consulting phrase again, the juice is not worth the squeeze. They don't produce a lot of money. They're not sure where to sell it. Inside the comic book shop, it's not a big seller. I mean, the amount of times that I had somebody come in and say, I really want a comic book based on this movie, that doesn't happen. It's not anything that actually ever occurs. So I think the comic book companies would, make themselves a lot happier and saner by not trying. Focus on kind of the primary goal, which is tell a great story. And in many cases, that's what the movies are. I mean, the movies are looking at it as, we got some source material here. We can use it as much as we want or as little as we want. But the key here is we got to tell a really exciting 2-hour story that has the right marketing levers to kind of pull people in here or there and kind of build, hopefully, our franchise. And it needs to have 3 acts, and that's the structure of the movies we do, and go. That's really what, that's what their job is. And they're doing that, relatively well. I mean, certainly there are movies that are bigger and better than others, and the MCU, I think, is struggling a little bit lately, but they know their mission. Comic books needs to know their mission, which is, get comic books sold, figure out more places to get it sold, tell a story that gets people to come back next month and buy another comic, and don't anything that kind of gets in the way or makes that mission confusing, avoid and stop. That's how it should be. Anyway, thank you very much for the mail. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Is it worth tying in or just forget about it? Is DC doing it fundamentally better? Let me know, and thanks for listening.